Welcome to Florida is Our Domain.
Hey everyone, welcome into an all-new episode of Florida is Our Domain with attorney Tony Policastro. I'm your host, Mike Leon. You know, Tony's a Florida eminent domain attorney and the founder of Policastro Law Group. He's got 30 years experience in the field representing national corporations, business owners, and individual landowners across the state of Florida. Today, we're joined by Jared Silver, who's also an eminent domain attorney over at the law group. And before joining the firm, Jared actually spent 7 years handling eminent domain cases for the Florida Department of Transportation. And earlier in his career, served as lead counsel in dozens of jury trials as an assistant state attorney over in Broward County. So in this episode, we're going to be looking at what happens behind the scenes at the FDOT when the government prepares a taking and makes its first offer. Gents, it's good to see you guys. Jared, let me start with you. Let's talk a little bit about your experiences over at the Florida Department of Transportation and how you're going to get me out of my unpaid turnpike tickets in a second. But how does a typical acquisition start internally over there before anything's even sent to the property owner?
Well, thank you for having us, Mike. So DOT, when they realize what they're going to do for the project and they have the parameters, what they'll do is what's called a project development and environment study, or PD&E study. And that's when they're looking for environmental factors, if there's any endangered species, they're taking soil samples, these kind of things. And to make sure, the reason they're doing that is in order to get federal funding through the NEPA, the Environmental Protection Act, they have to go through this process. When that's done, they'll send out a public meeting notice, and they'll gather information and feedback from the public. That'll typically be done at a community center or community college. It used to be all in person. Now there's usually an in-person and an online component for that. Once that public feedback is given, then at that point they will maybe incorporate some of that public feedback, and then at that point they will send out a notice to the property owner and start the acquisition process.
So Tony, let me ask you to chime in here on, like, how do you keep your client informed during this before the acquisition process begins?
That's a good question, Mike. What we do is we often have to sign these clients, or we do be retained by the clients several years before the actual acquisition begins. So what we do is we keep our clients fully informed with status update letters. We usually send the client status update letters at least every 6 months during the process. And what those letters will contain is updated information we've received from the Florida Department of Transportation 5-year work program that changes twice a year. Every 6 months, there's a tentative and an adopted work program that comes out. If it's a county or city, we'll follow the capital improvement programs that they have for each individual county or city if they're the ones doing the condemnation. And then we also check in with the project manager. There's usually a project manager assigned to each various project, certainly within the DOT, that we can talk with them to get an idea of when the project is going to begin, when construction is going to begin as well. And we also take a look at the individual project schedules that can let you know when an appraisal is going to begin for a certain project. But what actually kicks off the acquisition project is a notice to owner. And when the notice to owner is sent out, that gives the property owner all of their rights, including their rights to have an attorney and other experts represent them. And those costs, of course, the reasonable costs, are paid for by whoever condemns the property in Florida. So that's how that begins. And then shortly after that notice, there'll be a site inspection letter from the appraiser that the government side has hired on their behalf to begin appraising the property.
It's great insight into how this happens. You know, Jared, I want to go back to something we were talking about before. So when you're at DOT, right, when they start to evaluate a project, what kind of information determines what portion of the property they actually need, the government needs?
Yes, well, DOT has a lot of data, especially about traffic and traffic counts and traffic studies. So they know how often, certainly around, let's say, rush hour, because that's the busiest time, how often roads are backed up. So you can see, okay, so this road that was built, for instance, 50 years ago, that's a 2-lane road, around 5 o'clock, it's getting very, very backed up. because the capacity was built for 50 years ago, it's triple that capacity now in usage. So we need to make this from a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road. And of course, I say we, being FDOT, they need to expand it from a 2-lane to a 4-lane road. So then they're looking at, okay, this road is only, let's say, 50 feet wide, but in order to accommodate a 4-lane road with a divided highway and a divided median and a bike lane and a shared use walk path, now we need, let's say, an extra 30 feet. So now it needs to be an 80-foot road. So then it determines, okay, do we need 30 feet from one side, or are we taking 15 feet from each side? So those are the kind of things they're looking at when they're determining what land gets taken and in this process.
No, it's you could say we. I mean, remember, I live in Florida too, so I do want more more lanes and more access there. So
Old habits die hard.
exactly right. So Tony, let's go back to something on the client side. So once that first offer arrives, what are some of the common questions that the owners have?
First question is, can we get more money? So they want to know about, is this basically the final offer? Because a lot of people are, scared of the government, and they're concerned that, basically it's a take it or leave it offer, which it is not. So what I do is, of course, I give them a copy of the DOT or the government appraisal report. So they review it, have my experts review it. And often, we'll have that team meeting with the clients and the experts to answer all their questions. But yes, their common questions usually are, besides, can I get more money? They're also pointing out some of the faults or the problems with that appraisal report, which can be very, very helpful. We've had, clients point out, well, my business operates in a certain way, and now this taking is going to impede the business, which could be, a change in driveway. It could be loss of parking. It could be those various elements that will cause them to, stress and want to have answers to those questions.
Jared, let me ask you to piggyback on that. So like in your time there, and you talked a little bit about, hey, all right, we're going to expand to 4 lanes. We're going to add a bike lane, this and that. But like, how did the agency kind of approach the situation? Access, circulation, parking that's going to be affected. We're only taking a small part of land, but now we've got to communicate to the general public that no, this project needs to be bigger. How did the agency approach that?
Well, when it comes to those, you said parking, circulation, access, etc. DOT does try to minimize as much as they can, or as much as they think they can, because when parking gets taken or access gets taken, DOT would have to write a check. That is a damage, a severance damage, as part of the taking. So they are trying to minimize the amount. The problem is that DOT is coming at it from a bird's eye view. They're evaluating 50, 100, maybe even 200 properties in one project. They're not getting down to the nitty gritty of the individual parcel, which is why you need to hire a qualified and experienced eminent domain counsel, so they can hire the right people, the right engineers, the right land planners, so they can deep dive onto each individual parcel and say, okay, you think there's no problem with what you're taking in terms of access, but actually this property is used in a certain way at this time versus this time, so there may be a greater taking, and that's something that DOT never realized. And it's not because they're mean-spirited or doing something wrong or unethical. It's just they're just not taking the time and the expertise involved, because they're doing so many parcels at once, whereas a property owner's attorney is very specialized.
So Tony, let me ask you one more question on the property owner side of this. So I'm sure you've gotten this before. The first offer, you said it, they want more money, right? So they compare the first offer to the final resolution. They notice this large difference. From your experience though, and hearing what Jared just kind of mentioned about the project and how it grows, what tends to cause the gap that causes that once the owner's final compensation is determined, what tends to cause that huge gap?
What Jared was saying is true, is that DOT does not have the understanding often of what is exactly happening on that property from a business perspective. So they often don't really get all the nuances of how that business works, or even how the property itself functions. So often those large gaps could be about curing a problem, which is, fixing a problem on site to alleviate some of the problem. It can also be, severance damages, business damages that are results of the taking that they just don't really foresee what's going on. So that's why it's really important to have an engineer on board that can help, assess all of the issues, the on-site circulation, as Jared mentioned, even, parking loss. Sometimes the taking will affect signs on the property. It'll affect a variety of things. So the engineer is important. Also, sometimes the differences are also in the appraisal, because the DOT often, because the appraiser that they hire initially, just bids on the project and tends to win the project by having a lower bid. And so they're going to be, moving through doing this work of 50 or 100 parcels using the same cells over and over again, but not be taking a look at the particular function of that property and how it works. So therefore, they may not be using the correct sales, and therefore there'll be different sales out in the marketplace that we can utilize, and that will change the compensation.
And Jared, as we kind of land the plane on today's episode, from your time representing property owners, what are some differences that you've noticed in the way your old employer would handle cases and the way you guys handle cases?
Well, I think it's, thank you. That is a great question. I think it's a little piggybacking on what Tony just said, that when I was at FDOT, everything is, again, you're sometimes 50, 100 parcels on one project. There's only so much time you can spend on each individual one. And every meeting you're having is going to have 25, 30, 40 people involved. And there's only so much you can get done when so many people are involved in the meeting. Whereas working here at PLG, every meeting has at most 6 or 7 people. Everyone's being, the specialized time involved in your case is taken. That isn't taken with the DOT, just because DOT just can't. They just don't have the ability to do it in that time. And less is more sometimes. When you have the 6 or 7 people in the meeting, those are the 6 and 7 people who have the expertise and the decision makers. You don't need more than that. So having those large meetings, having that large bureaucracy at play can hinder your ability to properly evaluate a case.
Gents, thank you for the time, the insights, explaining all this to the audience. I appreciate it, guys.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
And thank you to everyone out there for listening to this installment of Florida is Our Domain. If your property or business is being affected by a public project, do me a favor right now, visit Policastro, P-O-L-I, castrolaw.com. You're going to schedule a consultation with Tony and the team, and they're going to be able to help you. Before you go, do me a favor, hit like, subscribe, leave a review, and comment, or share the episode with someone who needs to hear it. As always, I'm Mike Leon. See everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.